Hello and welcome to the sixth installment of Young Leaders podcast. On this episode, we have Anjana Aravind, who is a climate scientist and also runs a column on a magazine called Law and Order. This conversation between Dr. Abhishek and Anjana promises to be quite fascinating. So, without any further ado, let's get the intro rolling.
Welcome to episode 6 of Conversations with Young Leaders, which is hosted by the IFBWD. I'm your host, Dr. KP Abhishek, and today I'm with lovely guest, Anjana, who is a climate scientist and a columnist for the magazine Law and Order. Well, climate science is a very challenging field, and in the midst of hair-raising activists trying to convince you that the world's going to end in a couple more years if you don't give up everything of every material, and then if between them and the other bunch of loons who'd say that climate change is not real, there's nothing called climate change, and we can just go about using all our resources in the exactly same way, there's a lot of messages that get mixed up. And so I believe we are in desperate need of moderate voices who know the field and who can provide solutions that are effective and who can provide solutions that make sense to begin with. And Anjana is one such amazing person. I've seen her work online, and I've seen her work. I've seen her articles. She is quite the sobering voice in the midst of all these issues, and I believe this is a very good time to have her on, and I hope that you get to learn from this as much as I have learned from her articles and so on. So you're welcome to the podcast, Anjana.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and thanks for having me, Abhishek.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. And now it's a surprising change to see a climate scientist and an activist actually smile and not be panicked right at the get go, because
Oh
it's
my God,
always
we all need to be freaking out right now.
really like I've always seen like I've attended a couple of talks, and in all of them, all I've seen is the person just starts off by saying why what I'm going to say is going to worry you to death. So that's an essential pessimism in whatever they say, and you're smiling here, you seem relaxed, so this is already boding well for the conversation. So yeah, so let's just get into it. So do tell us, I mean, tell me, but yeah, tell us how you got to do climate science as your primary field of interest, as a career actually.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to shorten it. As a child, I think my parents were always very political in their views, and they never like censored anything from me in terms of politics or any kind of like. They taught me right from wrong at a very young age. And climate change was something that that always came up in the papers.
Hmm.
So I grew up in Singapore, and in the Straits Times, that's the national newspaper. Like climate change was, the around the
Hmm.
early 2000s, it was starting to become a hot topic, and it would always come in the newspapers.
Hmm.
And at that time, I heard about it from my parents talking about it, and then my dad, when I was in high school, he introduced me to Al Gore and his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. I watched that and I was pretty, shaken by it. But at that time, like being in high school, like what could I do about it? Like it was just, okay, this problem exists. What do I do? Because after high school, I need to go to college and,
Hmm.
essentially fulfill the
Thou
call
shalt and thou shalt
course.
nots of a good Indian child, yes.
Exactly. I mean, my parents never had that kind of an expectation from me, although they
Hmm.
did always tell me that, okay, you need to be on your own 2 feet, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think it's kind of rare among Indian parents that they
That
were like,
is.
where they never talked about marriage or anything like that. Like they never brought
Wow.
up traditional female expectations, which I thank them for like so wholeheartedly. Now in retrospect, at that time I took it for granted. I
Oh, they are
never.
not exclusively female experiences in India, trust me.
Okay, okay, I'm
I know
sorry.
from experience. Yeah, go on,
But
yeah.
yeah, and then like at that time I didn't really, they were my parents. I was so used to them. I just took it for granted. And then now in
Hmm.
retrospect, after having spoken to so many friends about this, it just seems like, oh, my parents are pretty open-minded.
Yeah.
And when I was in high school, they were like, okay, do anything but the arts for college. And I was at that time, like, thankfully, like I did have an interest in, like, painting and music and all that stuff. But I never saw myself as especially talented in those areas, and I never thought I could, do anything worthwhile with it, like succeed in it. So I was like, okay, it's better that I just keep it a hobby and like, not get
A
myself
small
into.
interjection here, which is very
Yeah.
ironical because I find your social media quite creative and artistic. So that you do post
Yes,
something.
yes. So,
Yeah.
thank you. But I was like, I don't think I ever wanted to be like, disciplinarily trained in that,
Okay. Yeah.
because then I feel
Yeah.
like I might have lost my interest because that happened to me with piano.
Okay.
So, yeah. And then I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, I'll do something in the sciences because I'm interested in anyway, but I didn't know exactly what to do.
Hmm.
And my parents are both engineers. So obviously they were like, engineering. And I was
Okay.
like, no thanks. And they didn't force me too much. They were like, they would subtly put in the notion that, okay, like, engineering is good for your future, it's reliable, blah blah blah, but they wouldn't like really push it too hard. And my dad was like, you could, if you're not if you don't want to commit yourself to, because when you take engineering, you have to kind of decide on a discipline within engineering from
Hmm.
the get-go, right
Hmm.
after 12th, right? And I wasn't someone who was like, who really understood what I wanted to do in life at
Hmm.
that age.
Hmm.
I don't think
Hmm.
anyone does.
Nobody does. I'm 25, still
Exactly.
don't do. Yeah.
So
So,
when you commit, like if you commit to like computer engineering or mechanical engineering or
hmm.
something, it's something that you have to, do for the rest of your life after the degree. I mean, unless
Or
it's
leave it at great personal cost. So
exactly,
it's more or
exactly.
less you're bound to it. Yes.
Yeah, so you spend 4 years and then it's kind of a waste if you don't like it at the end. So my dad was like, oh, something that's much more, flexible is physics, and you can go into any industry with,
Hmm.
a pure science degree, like a
Yeah.
physics, chemistry, maths. You can get into any branch you want, any kind of
Mm.
research, any kind of industry.
Yes.
Uh,
Theoretical, experimental. You can get into medicine
yeah.
with physics because the options are endless with physics. Yes.
Exactly. So I was like, okay, physics sounds like a good idea. And then I wrote entrance and did the whole, the classic JEE and JEE advanced stuff. And then went to
Okay.
NIT.
My condolences, my commiserations for that.
Thank you. So yeah, so then I joined NIT Surat, and in first year, I knew that. So at that time, I already was kind of leaning into the environmental sphere because
Hmm.
my parents, like in Singapore, my dad had really bad health conditions, so
Hmm.
he had to retire early, and that's why we came to Kerala. When we
Hmm.
came to Kerala when I was in like 10th standard, like 15 years old,
Hmm.
and he so like because of that, like they transitioned to this whole like organic living and all of that stuff. So I from them I kind of learned about I had a change in perspective, a shift in perspective, with relation to the environment, because over there it was a very very concrete jungle kind
Hmm.
of a lifestyle. It's the rat race of
Yeah.
concrete. You don't really appreciate, you don't get any time or energy or even like the facilities
Unless
to
you travel to northern Malaysia, which is the closest thing to forest you
yeah,
might
or
have. Yeah.
I mean the zoo and the bird park, they're all like curated, even the reservoirs and the whatever, like they're
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
very curated experiences of
Hmm.
nature, right? It's
Hmm.
not my parents were doing like a little bit of organic farming also, so
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
really understood like how things grow, and I was so fascinated by this, by the fact that like, oh, okay, like this is where produce comes from, this is how you grow produce. Like until then it's just, oh, you get produce from the supermarket, that's all.
And if you don't mind me asking,
Yeah.
after being fascinated by organic plants growing, didn't you didn't get the inclination to do biology in pure sciences, was it?
Oh no, I knew that I was terribly bad at biology because, unlike you, my memory serves me very badly, and I was also kind of grossed out by most organic matter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's
I
an
couldn't do
impediment. That's an
like
impediment
animal
for sure.
dissection and stuff. I couldn't.
Yes,
So
yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And also like I was always like very quite interested in technology as well. So I knew that like and my dad, like both of them being like engineers, they
Hmm,
also like always
hmm,
developed that in me. Um, so I like that. And then when I was in Kerala, every year in the news they would have this reports every time during the monsoon season. They would be like, oh, this is the longest, this is the shortest monsoon season we've had, or this is the longest time it has taken for the onset to happen.
hmm,
Or every
hmm,
year it was some or the other not anonymity in the type of monsoon
They're
that was.
making you aware of some changing
Yeah, and
patterns,
I was
or
like, okay,
kind of anxious about the climate.
yeah, and I was like, okay, what is happening? Like, why are they saying that?
Mm.
Okay, this is the first time it's happening in a few decades. First
Mm.
time it's happening in so long, and every year you would hear reports like that, and every year they would kind of link it to like the scientists in like NIO and stuff. They would link it to climate change or
Mm.
like El Nino and the strength of El Nino.
Mm.
Um, and that got me to thinking, like, that's when I really understood that, like, okay, it really affects people, because like it was affecting farmers, right?
Mm.
So their crops would fail, and then they would, like, you would see like
Yeah,
reports in.
that's an interesting thing, because the reason climate change doesn't seem to affect any change is because it people don't see it as like something you can actually see the effects of. It's some sort of a distant concept in a newspaper or in a textbook somewhere. Could you then so before we go on to talking about climate change, could you tell us what climate change entails? What is it really? What the definition is, and how do we know what's changing? How do we monitor it?
Yeah, yeah. So climate change is basically it encompasses mainly two things. First is global warming, the
Hmm.
rise in global temperatures, and the second is an anonymous behavior, like deviation from the norm of
Hmm.
large scale weather patterns.
Okay.
So
Okay.
an increase or decrease, or an increase in the intensity of cyclonic activity, wildfires, any large scale climate phenomenon.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, I think right now, like, climate change also encompasses the larger, like, ethos of environmental change, you know not
Hmm.
just like climatic phenomena, but local environmental change as well.
Yeah, when you
um,
change the factors, the environment tries to establish homeostasis by adapting to it. So that could be a maladaptation as well. So
exactly.
okay, okay, okay. You say, in my opinion, so that's not something that's shared by textbooks, is it?
No, I mean, that's not the scientific definition of climate change, right?
Oh,
Scientific
okay,
definition of climate change kind of leaves you with just the large scale atmospheric oceanic phenomena, and
okay.
not you don't feel like it's something that will affect farmers, or you don't, like, when you read it, it's
Hmm.
not something that will affect local water supply, or things like that.
Hmm.
So when you look at it from that perspective, so that's coming back to that, when I saw that farmers in Kerala were being affected, I was like, okay, this is actually affecting humans, because in Singapore it's like you don't see that happening, right? Like everyone's
Hmm.
doing, it's an urban lifestyle, like everyone's going to office.
Although uniquely, Singapore has its let's say vulnerability, because most of it is
Yes,
land reclaimed from the ocean, isn't it? So
exactly,
therefore,
exactly.
a rising ocean levels for
Yeah.
Singapore is not really
But
all that.
for, yeah, but for them it's, I mean, over there it's like you have this person, the government is very, it's like a mother. So it just
Hmm.
it knows that, and it's like, yes, we have the experts who will build the dikes, no need to
Okay.
worry. And everyone's like,
Okay.
okay, appeased,
Oh,
that's it.
that's
And other
that.
than that threat of sea level rising, which the government will take care of for you, other than that there is nothing that affects you, because and also even the heat doesn't affect you, because every place is air conditioned. It's like, it's so easy to live in a bubble that is in complete
Hmm.
dinner.
Although I myself, in my recent readings, I am not very sure about the health safety of air conditioners in total. If
Oh,
you
it's not.
watch, yeah, so it isn't really wise to say, I have ACs, I can take care of global warming, and then
Mm.
they do have their own health consequences by themselves.
But I
But
mean, like, they don't feel it. And also my dad's
no,
health reasons were mostly because of the air conditioning. So
oh, okay,
yeah, it
okay,
was
yeah.
respiratory stuff. So yeah, so then after that, like, when I went to I mean, can I continue with the.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, go on, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so then when I went to college, I was still like, I was thinking about it, but I was like, how do I connect physics to this, right? Because
Mm,
how do you, with, I mean, in physics, we were learning, in first year, it was just like basic stuff. But then even when you look at the syllabus, like up till fifth year, it's all, there was just one semester where we had one subject in remote sensing, and that was the closest that we had to any kind of like geographical stuff. Everything else
okay.
was just like, it was all high energy, nuclear physics, plasma physics, all of that, like very
Hmm.
theoretical, experimental stuff. My electronics also, and very technical stuff. So I was that one person in class who was like, oh, how do I relate this to like climate change and like get into that sphere. So in second year, I decided to apply for a scholarship, mostly because around that time, like our seniors had we had a strong like senior batches had already shown us
Hmm.
the kind of scholarships and
Hmm.
internships that we could take. For pure sciences, there's actually a lot more opportunities, I would say, to go work in places than for engineering. I mean, and engineers have industries, but they don't have so many scholarship programs. Whereas
Hmm.
for research, there's a lot of scholarship programs.
Yes, yes.
And so, yeah,
Were you an outlier at NIT for wanting to choose climate science? I could imagine
yeah,
that.
I
Mhm.
was actually the only person in my class and actually the batch when we presented our thesis to have when I presented our master's thesis defense. So it's a 5-year program. It's not a bachelor's and
Oh,
master's.
okay.
Bachelor's and master's combined into 5 years. So the final thesis presentation, I did on climate change. I mean, basically the effects of global southern ocean warming on global sea level rise. And I remember that so it was like a group of 10 people that day who were supposed to present their thesis, and the
Hmm.
external examiner was kind of bored already because everyone was had given their presentations on nuclear physics and high
Hmm.
energy, and some people had done really cool stuff, like they had gone and worked at CERN and everything. um,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay.
so it
Yeah.
was but it was all very theoretical. Okay, and then I came along, and then he looks at my dissertation, and then suddenly he sits up, and then he he looks at my professor, and he's like, "What is this?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, she's into climate change." And then he's like, "Oh, that's allowed."
Yeah, we have one of those in our college. Oh yeah, this is that time.
Yeah, so I think I was one of those like hippies that but then the examiner was pretty like he was curious, and
Hmm.
he also like so the first question he asked me after I was done with the presentation was, so climate change is real? And I was like, oh my god.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That should
and then
have strengthened your resolve to do climate science right there. Just
no,
yeah, that's
especially coming from like a physics professor, it's like wow, I mean, he wasn't in denial of it, but he wasn't also sure of whether it was actually true. So he just wanted me to like convince him, and I was like, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then yeah, so then I did an internship at the National Institute of Oceanography in Goa when I was in second year, and there that's when I kind of opened up my eyes to the larger world of research, because there I applied for earth systems because I wasn't really sure what to do. Like I was like, okay, as a with a physics background, I'm allowed to apply to the earth systems
Hmm.
programs, I
Hmm.
mean the projects. And I just picked one that was related to the monsoons, the Kerala monsoons, because I was
Hmm.
that's where I
Invested
got.
in it. Yeah. Yeah.
So the effects of like El Nino on the Kerala monsoon, and when I was doing that research, I was just so fascinated by the fact that something that happens off the coast of Peru can
Hmm.
affect something so local to us, right?
Hmm.
So that was what set off that chain reaction of, okay, like I want to go in and explore this further. And then next year I applied to Potsdam Institute in Germany, and then this was funny because I literally like I remember when I knew that for DAD we had to like get in touch with a German professor, and decide on a project and then apply for the scholarship. So I was like, okay, I want to work on um, anything related to climate science because at that time I was still like very naive about things. And I just went on Google and I was like, climate scientist Germany. And then the first name that popped up, Anders Lieberman. I emailed him and I was like, I read his work and everything, and I found it fascinating. But
Hmm.
even at that time, like I didn't really know how important he was in the climate space. I
Hmm.
just like
Hmm.
I wasn't. I didn't know the gravitas of journals like Nature and Science. I just
Ah,
knew they
okay.
existed.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
As a
Yeah.
second year student, you're just like, ah, yeah, okay, like it's a journal, I guess. Like, and you're not exposed to research journals at all because our institution was heavily like engineering
Hmm.
oriented. So research was a very like niche thing that few people know.
Yeah, I mean, to provide some context for what nature and science is to our audience, like if you publish once in Nature or Science, your career is made. Like you know you're going. So if you publish once in those journals, and
Yeah.
yeah, if you're a primary author, that is, you can have so many authors. If you're a primary author in one of those journals and you're cited by them in another article again, your career is more or less made. You're going to be, you're going to be called for conferences. You have an assured position unless you do something drastic to lose it. Yeah, so that's how important. Just one paper in these journals will just elevate a career completely. So yeah, so it is an extraordinary thing that. But I've not heard of Lieberman's work. Can you?
So he does not have one or two. Like he has more than 120 publications, and more than half, I think, are on nature.
Oh wow.
Nature
Okay.
climate change. He is
Yeah.
like, he just at that time, like it didn't really like I was like, okay, like nature is a journal, I guess. Like when I was applying, I was like, okay. And then what I was so happy to see was that he actually started out as a physics graduate. He wrote his first papers in optics in
Hmm.
so it
Wow.
was
Okay.
in optics and photometrics, and it was like so different to the field that he is in now, which is
No, this is very weird. So on my second podcast, I had you and the naturalist whose work you also know, right? So
yeah,
he
you went,
took
yeah.
he took zoology in his undergrad, and then he said, "Yeah, I couldn't handle dissection," so he took up physics in his undergrad. So he left that. Also, it's very curious. I'm hearing about all these naturalists, environmentalists, climate scientists, something to do with the environment. They all do physics in the undergrad. Perhaps,
Yeah,
mm,
I was so surprised because there's so many people in physics. I mean, from physics backgrounds who are in the climate science sphere.
Yes, I think when you deal with so many non-living things in the field, you just get bored of it and say, "Let's just do something that shows some sign of life," and therefore that could also be a reason. But you're very inspired in the first place. So before we move on to more climate related, like to move on to other topics with respect to climate change, could you possibly with little anxiety elucidate what do you think are the most likely consequences that we will face owing to massive climate change in the next, let's say, 100 years? Like, I
Okay.
know we can't predict it with
Yeah.
abstract accuracy, but what are the most likely, candidates for what to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the media, especially, has kind of given people also like movies like 2012
Yeah.
have kind of given people this notion that when things start going south, it will be an apocalyptic, like sudden ending, and you'll have zombies, and everything will just die in like 1 second.
Mm,
That's not going to happen. But
mm,
what is going to happen is a very slow collapse.
mm,
And I think that humans have you know uh, uh, um, the necessary willingness and the want to the willpower to basically fight against all the systems that are breaking down, and we see them breaking down right now, right?
mm, mm,
um, and what climate change is going to do is kind of exacerbate. Right now we've seen with the pandemic, it's shown us inequalities in so many aspects of economics, in
mm,
like what are essential workers, why are we paying CEOs so much when the people that we actually need in this
mm,
world are not getting paid even a minimum wage.
mm,
And so that's what the pandemic showed us, and I think climate change is showing us other things, like uh, questioning our entire premise of is the modern way of living necessarily better than hunter gatherer agrarian ways of living,
mm.
and can we reinvent another way of living that kind of blends the two and makes us
So there's
not
a there's a
harm the environment so much. So
There's a thread that I would like to explore more, actually. So sorry
yeah,
to interrupt so rudely,
you know
but you said that the pandemic is one such event where it's a stress test for the whole world, where systems that are dysfunctional but can be smoothed over can no longer be smoothed over, and you see massive inequality and divides and massive infighting, and which almost threatens there's a threatened civil war in places like the US, or how political parties handle the pandemic. So you believe that the consequences of climate change will not be a wave like in 2012, but rather it will be similar such stress events that expose similar insecurities in the system, and then cause more division and inequality and so on. So that's how you believe that climate change will. It will never be like an apocalyptic wave like the Noah's Ark or 2012, is it?
Yeah, no, no. So also, I mean, if you look at, for example, recently in Iraq, they had such the worst, temperatures on record, like the hottest temperatures on record,
Mm.
and people really couldn't like stand outside for like more than a few hours. Like it was just like they were like, we cannot bear this heat, right? And it's happening in small pockets, like the island of Fiji. They had to evacuate the island natives because of sea level rise. And so all of
Oh.
this happens, and like it's starting to happen. Bangladesh has climate refugees,
Mm.
who are moving away from the coastal areas, and all of
Yeah.
these are happening in pockets of the world, which still hasn't kind of impacted the majoritarian world, which is, the West, and whoever's in charge of like media and stuff. But it is slowly encroaching on their territory as well. Like in Naomi
Mm.
Klein's book, This Changes Everything, she talks about how
Mm.
Canada never really cared about what's happening in the rest of the world, where their stuff in the supermarkets and shops are coming from, because it's the manufacturing and resource extraction and everything is happening somewhere in China, somewhere in Asia. But once it began to happen in their backyard, in
Mm.
Alberta, in Calgary, like when it began to happen in those places, then suddenly they are, becoming much more conscious and aware of how dependent we are on the natural world and how damaging our lifestyles are for it. So I think that these kind of cracks, like the more they approach the urban middle class, and they need to, and they will, the more they do it, will the more we will realize that this is
Mm.
happening, and that we need to change our systems, because our systems are at fault for this. And another thing is that, stuff that we take for granted, like agriculture and food supply and water supply. Even right now we know that, like, all of India's major cities are going to face
Mm.
water scarcity in the next couple
Mm.
of years.
Yes.
We know that, and we know that that's going to happen, but I still see people, like, leaving their water tanks open when it's being filled. So it's like people on the ground, like on the grassroots level, really don't, they've heard of it, but they don't know that it's going to happen. But it will happen. It's not like
Mm.
the climate is going to wait until everyone understands it.
Mm.
And so when it does happen, we'll be forced to find solutions for it. Then
Mm.
at that point, it'll be another stressor event that makes people realize that that system is, flawed.
Yeah, and to pick on something you said, there is this that only in it approaches the Western middle class. They're the most polluters and the consumers, and yet so there is this curious thing where we have managed to engineer a life, for lack of a better word, where you can consume with no restriction and externalize the cost of that consumption onto communities that are not partaking in the consumption of said resources. So there's a, and that this is a kind of a problem of the way we live that's causing this problem. And so I think I did read in a couple of your articles about this, that you did highlight it rather well, the psychology of what's leading on to onto, I would say onto climate change, that is, so could you expand on that a bit more, because I believe that you phrase it in a way that's really really very unique, and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, is this the one where we're redefining development, or?
Yes, yes, yes. Where we are redefining development, because yeah, we just thought, yeah, that's the one I've been that's been on my mind ever since I read it. That's a very very wonderfully written article by you,
Okay.
and so I do believe people should know, should read it. I'll drop in a link on the Instagram post if anybody's interested. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, so what that article set out to do was something that I noticed, I think, from a very early age on, was the fact that, people are very kind of, everyone puts expectations on you to live a certain way, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Society puts an expectation on you to consume a certain way, not to live a certain way, but to live a
Hmm.
certain way, but that living involves consuming in a certain way.
Hmm. By
Okay.
consuming, you mean resources like water,
Not just that.
any. Okay. Okay.
That's also there, but I mean material consumption.
Hmm.
So for example, like when I was a kid in Singapore, it was like, oh, there's this in school you would always be teased if you didn't have like the latest Nike Airs or the Converse, or like brand loyalty was such a strong sentiment over there, especially among
Hmm.
kids. Like kids
Hmm.
are dumb, it's okay.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but in India, I thought that it wouldn't be there because I don't know. I thought maybe the wealth difference kind of like reduces it, but here it's like it's just the same, but it's different things, right? So it would
Hmm.
be like, oh, what kind of car do you have? Oh, how much are you spending on this? How much do you spend on your house? So it's like people always kind of expect that level of consumption from your if you are
Hmm.
in a certain
It's a
class of
social status by
it's a
itself. It's a
social status.
performance of sorts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what the media has successfully with its marketing, and I blame mostly the American media for this.
Hmm.
They have successfully, and obviously they did that for during the Cold War. I mean, they started doing that during the Cold War. Their propaganda machine, and also they were the ones who invent. I mean, Ford started mass manufacturing, and then that kind of spread into all the industries
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
else,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. Sure. Sure.
So it was like you can't sell a car to someone who's happy with their horse cart, right?
Okay.
You have to create the need, you have to
Hmm.
create the desire, and then you have to sell for it. And
Hmm.
so the media realized that it plays a very important role in doing this. I mean, they realize that they can, convert a lot of minds into thinking that they need the things that they advertise to them,
Hmm.
right?
Did
And
I talk to you about the documentary called Century of the Self in our previous conversations?
no, I didn't know.
No, okay. So somehow we didn't get to this. I mean, we did. So the Century of the Self is this wonderful documentary by Adam Curtis. I encourage anybody who's listening to the podcast to after you finish the podcast, go and watch this on YouTube. Do listen to this fast. I mean, Anjana is really lovely, so listen to this fast. But the Century of the Self is a wonderful podcast, wonderful documentary, and it's about Adam Curtis, and it's about. I would say that the creation of the American mass manufacturing, like the mass desire manufacturing machine, was a little bit more earlier than the Cold War. So it involved Edward Bernays. I don't know if you have come across the name Edward
Yeah, I've
Bernays.
heard of that name. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a cousin of Sigmund Freud. He
Okay.
used psychoanalytical techniques,
Oh.
among other things, to begin marketing in the first place. So, also, a simple explanation is, women never used to smoke until the early 1900s. It was
Mm-hmm.
There's a taboo against women smoking. And then
Mm-hmm.
what Edward Bernays did was so wonderful was that he got a group of suffragettes. Suffragettes were the people who were
Yeah.
campaigning for women's right to vote at that point of time, and people were doing extraordinary things for because women didn't have the right to vote. So he got a group of suffragettes. He made them all small. He made them all whip out a cigarette at the exact same point of time. Got a bunch of the media to be present. To click the photo there, click the photo of a lot of women taking a tobacco out, and he called it, I think, lamps of fire towards freedom of women. So he
Oh.
branded women smoking, which is a health hazard, into
Yeah.
this is no longer a brand of ill health. It's about bringing forth freedom and emancipation to women whose rights have been denied. So this
Oh.
invoked the Statue of Liberty with her lamp, right? So it's again a
Yeah.
woman with her lamps of freedom that she's doing.
Mhm.
This is in the early 1920s, and it was known that cigarette companies approached him to do this, and so he did this. So this is kind of how they manufactured desire, as you say. No,
Yeah.
nobody needed a car, but instead, in Wolf of Wall Street is an amazing thing. So in the
Mhm.
movie Wolf of Wall Street, how does he sell you a pen? He doesn't sell you a pen by saying this pen does this good. He said, why
Yeah.
don't you write down that thought? So he creates a need for you to use a pen and then sells you the pen. That's
Mhm.
kind of what subtly is happening among the whole world. I mean, and I'll let you speak for now, but I just wanted to mention that documentary. It's really an incredible one. I'll send you a link after this as well. But yeah, but that kind of consumerism is definitely harmful for the planet. That's what we are on, aren't we? And so, do you think the solution lies then? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think their solution lies in because the problem you've identified is quite an incredible problem. Because even if we have fossil fuels and we find alternatives to fossil fuels,
Mhm.
I don't know how we can, but even if we do manage to find alternatives to them, how are we going to stop the same consumerist mindset from overusing that resource and then
Yeah.
needing another and going to face another crisis soon? So
Yeah.
unless we do change the way we live, there's definitely no hope for us to
Mhm.
make sure we can form a life that's really sustainable and keep sustaining itself for generations, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And here's the premise is that, nobody's talking about expectations or desires changing. They are talking about we will come up with sustainable energy alternatives to feed your desires as long as you want, right?
Okay.
And what the biggest problem I think that I highlighted in my article Redefining Development is that this so right now there is a whole like ethos of consumerism and how a middle class person is expected to live. You see that on Instagram all the time, you see that on YouTube all the time, you see so many influencers teaching people, like showing people, the media, everyone showing people what your bedroom should look like, what your hall should look like, what
What
kind
your
of
holidays should look like. You should travel to all these places
what
for
your
no
wardrobe
reason
should look
whatsoever.
like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you don't meet those standards, or you don't identify with that, then you kind of start getting dismissed by peers in your society, right?
Oh,
So then you
yeah.
don't want to do that, you want to live like that. And the American dream has been very successfully sold to the rest of the world as well, right?
Mm.
You need a big house, you need a big car, how do you face your neighbors without all that?
Mm.
So it's like that dream has manifested in so many forms. So in India, for example, you have every day, I think the United Nations, was it? They released a report saying that every day in developing countries like India, this was before the pandemic, around 40 people transition from being lower class to middle class incomes, right?
Mm.
And or they transition from rural to semi-urban, or uh, yeah, every day 40 people, right? And what are we telling these 40 people every day is that you need to do this so that you can live like how we in movies or TV shows tell you how to live, right?
Mm.
So that you can consume the way that we are consuming, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
so even if
You
they
don't
are
have an LED plasma TV that's 42 inches. Oh, you're torturing yourself. You need to buy that
exactly.
LED. Yeah.
And so it's like if you might be living a very sustainable life right now, but what you
Mm.
need to do to be, accepted by us is consume as much as we do. And then a few decades later, you must realize that your consumption levels are too high or your plastic consumption is too high. And then you must be like, oh, I want to be sustainable now. So I will buy sustainable brands and try to be sustainable. But now I have a concrete house and, everything is like dependent on coal powered electricity and groundwater and all of that stuff. But that's okay because now you're trying to be live a sustainable life and identify with the sustainability movement.
I bought a bamboo brush. I am saving the planet.
Exactly. And that irony that that you are
Yeah.
trying to, this is what I have a problem with, like urban environmentalists, is that they will talk simultaneously about development, and this development is defined by Western ethnocentrism.
Hmm.
This goal of development that we're supposed to reach, this that goal was defined by Western media,
Is there a
right?
goal to this? I mean, I was imagining that it's a goalless development for the sake of
I
development.
know
There's no end to
exactly.
the
I
progress.
mean
Yeah.
that, like, there's a minimum margin that you have to, like, you have to live in
Do
an
every
urban
year. Yeah. Yeah. You need
and
three iPhones releasing every year. That's the
exactly,
minimum
exactly.
minimum
There's a
qualification to call
minimum
it
criteria.
development.
You need a smartphone, you need a car, you need a this thing, whatever. Like there's everyone has their own minimum criteria in their head, but it's all morphed by this media
Hmm.
message, right? And once they and so the thing is that when urban environmentalists talk about, oh, we shouldn't be cutting down RA, or we shouldn't be cutting destroying the Himpat, but at the same time they will say that underdeveloped people like Adivasis and indigenous people need to become developed. We need to provide them education, our version of education. We need to provide them our version of healthcare. Because
Hmm.
I always wondered, if you fracture a leg or you get a cold or whatever, you go to the hospital because you a clinic because that's the only thing you know. How have these tribes and these people been living for so many? Do they never fracture their legs? Do have they always had a hospital to go to? Like, what
Yeah.
do they do to resolve
They
these
were
things,
safe
right?
from hospitals. They were safe from hospitals. That's how I put it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, I was like, how do they do this? And it's not like, no, they die from the fracture or something. They must have their own medicines, and we know that
Hmm.
they do, right? And it's like we are saying that, oh, they need our healthcare and our education, and they need to be put into our economic system, and they need to start relying on a monetary system. They need to
Hmm.
start relying on currency for living. become part of this entire capitalist workplace thing, and then then we can call them developed, and then we can act as saviors. But at the same time, we don't want the forest to be cut to provide cheap energy for them to do so. So it's
Yeah.
like, what do you want, right? You
There
either.
is an empty virtue signaling that's going on here. I think
Exactly.
it comes from us. I think if you're living an extraordinary self-centered life, you feel guilty. You need to do something for the environment. Let's do something for some people, and then because it's a hastily thought out measure, it has very bad ends because it's a hastily thought out measure,
Yeah.
unsurprisingly. And this is kind of what's happening. This kind of ties in. I don't know if it ties it very well, but I can segue this into talking about, let's say, the most common kind of climate activist I see are like Extinction Rebellion. That's the group I've encountered sometime in the UK. And while the intention, that is to save the earth, is quite noble, what they campaign for or how they project climate change to be doesn't seem all that accurate to begin with, are also genuinely moralistically good to go for. And this is where, coming from India, as you said, I worked in rural hospitals for about a year and a half, and I've seen people in the quality of life they live. Because you have this perspective, you're able to see that the west, the people at the west, who are the stakeholders on the table for fighting for climate policies, very rarely do they get things right for the actual stakeholders on the ground, do they?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with, them not being able to, I mean, even like, I understand where they're coming from because they don't, like, I didn't relate until I was forced to relate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
It's like
Yeah.
when you are in a comfortable bubble, unless someone, pushes you out of that bubble,
Hmm.
and you have the free will to stay in that bubble until you die. And so
Yeah.
nobody, no matter how much people tell you something, you're never going to realize it until you are in the war zone, so to speak.
Yeah, you never
Um,
appreciate how well your mother cooks until you start cooking yourself. In a
exactly.
very,
Yeah,
in a very
exactly.
similar way, only when you go out to nature and see the fragile balance that the
Mm.
ecosystem maintains, only then do you know, okay, so much is dependent on this temperature not rising beyond a
Yeah.
certain degree. Yeah.
And
But
what else? I'm
but
sorry.
while they do say that, I mean, the Extinction Rebellion or Greta Thunberg, while they are concerned about ecosystems and balance, primarily, I believe the problem is, and do correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm certainly as not as nowhere as informed on this topic as you are. But sort of what I could take away from that is that the panic that they cause is inspiring solutions that are really not good. I mean, as you said, they want to replace, let's say, solar. They want to replace coal and fossil fuels with solar and wind, which we know don't even account for 15% of renewable energy, right? And when we say renewable, it means we mean wood or water. That's where you can store hydroelectric energy. So the solutions that are that are coming out of the panic caused by groups like Extinction Rebellion or Greta Thunberg, who's not a
Yeah.
group but more or less there's a group funding her. So, but because of such things, what's happening is the solutions aren't great, aren't they? But at the same time, yeah, it's so complex. How do you make sense of this? I'm not, I'm trying to find a. I weaved us successfully into the web of problems. I'm not able to find a way back. Can you help me in this? Yeah.
Okay, so I think with Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg, as you said, they are, they have a good heart, they have good intentions.
Yes.
The problem is Jack, I forgot his surname,
Twitter.
um, who started Extinction Rebellion.
Oh,
Um,
okay, okay. No, no, no. I don't know his name as well. You call him
yeah,
Jack. Yeah, yeah,
Jack
yeah.
something. But yeah, so when Jack started Extinction Rebellion, or I don't know if he's the founder, but he was one of the founders, and when they did that, they were still, I empathize because they did that out of like kind of, they were fed up with the system, and they were fed
Hmm.
up with the
Hmm.
adults not caring about it. But at that time, when I say adults, adults relative to them, because they still weren't fully educated on the topics. None of them, as far as I know, ever had a climate science background.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Greta Thunberg also, she's a teenager, right? So all she knows is that, okay, the policies currently that we have are bad, but that's
Agreed.
about it. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and when you get large groups of people to, what I've always questioned about Extinction Rebellion is, my question about them was always, yes, you are it's great that you are, demanding that the government take action. But
Hmm.
here's the next question: what kind of action do you want them to take? Like, what exactly do you want them to do right now at this
Hmm.
very moment? Like, what
Hmm.
policy do you want to change? How do you want to change it? And so it comes down to the fact that, like, most of them are not science or policy experts.
Hmm.
And they very rarely do put up very well informed rebellions, I would say, where they
Hmm.
are talking
Okay.
about a specific in kind of goal, and saying that, okay, instead of this percentage of uh, whatever, like carbon tax or whatever, like we want it to be this percentage. Very rarely are they talking about specific goals. And so therefore, to the people in the policy sphere and to the people in the climate sphere, um, they are basically kind of fighting with a very mm, abstract
Hmm.
goal in mind, right?
Hmm.
It's not a very definitive thing.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
you can sense that in the philosophy in a certain bit that because the because of the way they proceed with their climate activism,
mm,
the nature of the conversation between policymakers and activists, which should be a very informed, scientific, moderate discussion,
yeah,
turns into mob rule of mob activism, and
yeah,
because of that, the governments and the policymakers just do the bare minimum to satisfy the mob, which isn't all that much or all that well informed or well intentioned.
mm,
And so finally, even if they are arguing for the right reasons, the
mm,
way they argue is inspiring solutions just for mobs appeasement rather than
yeah,
possess any kind of validity, long-term
exactly.
validity or effectivity. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and also, like, the I think what it does is it kind of increases the polarization within the community, of like
Hmm.
people who, when you do the kind of protest that Extinction Rebellion does, you give people a chance to say either, oh, they're fighting for a good reason, we understand,
Hmm.
and you give the more non-empathetic people, or the people who just don't have the time and energy to understand it, you give them the chance to say, oh, look, they're acting crazy, this is why I don't like, people who believe in climate change, or like,
Hmm.
they're just extremists. So you're
Hmm.
giving people a chance to become more polarized about the issue because of the way that you are going about doing the protesting. I'm not saying what they're doing is bad, I'm just saying that, like, there are many better ways to do it than
Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 It's not. They do have good intentions. It's just that
mm,
the end result. But I think I don't know who it was. It was a very wise person that we all know. But he came up with a quote: "Before you do an extraordinary evil, you will have to convince yourself that you have the best intentions at heart." So in a certain way, you might not intend that's that thing, but
yeah,
actions do have consequences. Many of
yeah,
them unintended because we can't account for them with our because systems are complex now and our brains can't handle them. The systems have grown beyond the capacity of human brains, really. So that's quite that's quite the thing. But so this just call in for not only and this is also giving me another thread of conversation is that and we should be more informed on a variety of issues before we take it up, and rather we are trained to be, as you said, if you're going to engineering, you're supposed to pick a path and narrow your focus, and then narrow your focus so much so that all that you know can be fit into a pin's head, basically. That's how narrow you're supposed to specialize in. And that's what the world seems to like, because I remember in medicine, if I just finished with my MBBS and I said, oh, let me just learn about all of medicine, they said, no, that's wrong, specialize now, do this, and do in heart, specialize on this one fiber in this one corner of the heart and only think about that. So that's how the world's going into in generally with all fields. But in order to bring about successful cross disciplinary action, you don't need to be in a polymath of such. You didn't need to know about a lot more fields. Do you think the educational system, I mean, I know you want it to change, but how do you envision this concept? Because you're a physicist, you know about climate change. We have talked about how you would like climate scientists to know more about policy and reform and economy and so on. So how would you how what would you like to see be change?
okay, so what level of education are we talking about? Okay, let's just go with like the base, like primary school education.
Oh yeah,
um,
okay.
I think one thing that this is going to sound very random when I say, but I'll explain. I think one thing that we all need to learn is psychology.
Hmm.
Because so right now, if you look at the world, a lot of we know, largely everyone kind of knows that, okay, we need some kind of systemic reform, we need some kind of large scale changes to happen. But at the same time, in their daily lives, they do not, understand or empathize with people who are dealing with problems that they're suffering from. Like, for example, like, how do I say this? Okay, if you are a climate change denier, you will always feel attacked by the climate activists who
Hmm.
call you stupid all the time, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
not exactly a way to appease the other side and like bring them into the conversation. That's just pushing them away. And what politics around the world, like what the victory of Bolsonaro, Trump, all of that has shown us, is that polarization is working. It's the more you call the other side stupid, the more they are going to hate you, and the more they are going to form their own
Hmm.
stronger
Hmm.
communities.
Hmm.
And so we need like a both sides need to be empathetic with each other. Like, some people who are dependent on industries like mining and all of that for daily livelihood, and if
Hmm.
that's all they know, they don't care about climate change. Like, how do you tell them, oh, hey, quit your job, stop working for Shell or Exxon or whatever,
Yeah,
and completely change your line of your way of living, right? And
yeah.
because you're doing bad for the environment, how do they do that? So what I would say is, if you teach psychology from a young age and you make children understand their mindset and other people's mindsets.
But I wanted to interrupt you there actually. So
Yeah, sure,
perhaps
sure.
this interruption
Yeah,
wasn't all that unintended. So how it would be, when you say psychology, you do
yeah,
mean like basically, and what the end products of the psychology you are trying to advocate for are basically humane virtues and values, aren't they? Just
exactly.
just
Yes,
empathy, just
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 empathy
plain
for
old.
living creatures, for ourselves, for other humans. Yeah,
Yeah, but the world that's as narcissistic, as self-centered as ours has
yeah,
really no chance for developing true empathy. And that's why you have this for empathy. Like Westerners want to
yeah,
help the climate change, but that's not true empathy, because
yeah,
true empathy takes a lot of work, a lot
mhm,
of time, a lot of effort. But
yeah,
instead, as you said, why would a person not look at the fact that what they are doing is
yeah,
causing unintended consequences and hurting the agenda of all them? Because it's
yeah,
not about the actual thing, it's about the fact that they are advocating for the thing, rather than, if you're for climate change, it's not about to stop climate change from, or to prevent extraordinary climate shifts, or whatever the harmful consequences are. It's not to prevent them, but it's rather that I should be known as a person who advocated for climate change. There is an
mhm,
extraordinary self-centeredness to most of the
uh,
people, not just in the West and the East. Now it's
yeah,
one global civilization. But
yeah,
rather than campaigning for the issue, they're
mhm,
campaigning for them to campaign for the issue, and
yeah,
therefore the spotlight stunt, and you're not going to get true empathy that way. While
yeah,
you're true about psychology, and I would think, I certainly would think Freudian psychology would actually be good here, but
yeah.
there needs to be self-reflection there.
Yes,
I know a
exactly.
lot of psychologists who would
Reflection.
analyze the other person amazingly well, but they have a blind spot, a huge blind spot when it comes to them. So that's
Yeah,
so yeah. So but I think that's a very at the very least, it starts to address the solution,
yeah.
teaching people to think of the mind of others. Yeah.
Exactly. And also systems. Like, so here's something that I don't like about our current education system, is that it prepares you to work for the system, but it never explains the system to you, right?
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
prepares you to be a cog in the workforce of a capitalistic system, but it never explains what capitalism is, what's neoliberal capitalism, why are we living like this, why do we have the institutions that we have in place, what is the financial economy, what is the real economy. All of this I learned from the internet. And it's like, it's mind blowing how important it is to our daily lives, like, to a taxpayer's life, not even to a taxpayer's life, like, it affects every single person's life, and
Yes.
we don't
Yeah.
really know its workings. And it's considered something that you just, oh, like, you learn about it, like, you just figure it out for yourself. Even
Hmm.
like financial things like investment and wealth and all of that stuff, like, we never understand all of that until we dig it up for ourselves, and most people can be bothered to dig it up, so you kind
Hmm.
of have to teach them these things.
I think you are. I think on this extent, your work on social media highlights this culture, the idiocy that's inherent in culture. So why don't we? So this will be a good segue to show a couple of what you have done really on Instagram. Let's see this. Yeah. So this is yeah. I'll just come out of here. Yeah. So I think this is I think of the kind of On your social media. I'll just go through a tour of your social media if you don't mind. But yes, so this is one. This was one such extraordinary cultural critique that just hit right there, where you talked about, where what we take assumed as, like we. Like people in the West and people in the East as well think that, just to travel to places and experience the culture is equivalent to getting the cultural wisdom, and that, but in the process they do a lot of harm as well. But you just had to, can you explain the process of thinking that went into this cover? Because this quote there, oh my god, I love tradition, I went to Bali on vacation, that they can see here. This is possibly the funniest post I've seen on social media in a while. But do go on, tell me what's the thought
So
process behind it.
I think this was inspired by a kind of cultural appropriation that I have my own colloquial term for, but I won't say that here. But anyway, there's this. It's a kind of cultural appropriation that yeah, I didn't know the word cultural appropriation for this like earlier. I just, kind of laughed it off. But now
Mm,
I have a term to address it. So, for example, when I was traveling, like when I was in Germany or Sydney or whatever, I always saw that in flea markets, there will be one person who's selling exotic, South Asian crafts. Like they will have pashmina shawls and
mm,
um, Indian jewelry and everything, and they'll be selling it for like really exorbitant rates compared to like here, obviously. And
yeah.
if they're selling it for like $25, $30 over there, you know that they got it in the market here for like 20, 50 rupees.
Mm,
Um, and this I found very funny because I was like, oh, it's it's like they get to say, I mean, the people who sell and the people who buy, they both get to say that, oh, they get to posture about the fact that, oh, okay, like I love Indian culture, oh my god, it's like it's so great, and look at me, I'm wearing this, or like, I completely love the design and all of that stuff. But what they want is to just, take the pretty elements and then take that for themselves, and then completely, nullify kind of the tradition behind it, or the meaning behind that
mm,
thing. And sometimes it's like sacred ceremonial things that they
mm.
have no clue about, and they
Okay.
will do that. And it's not just like, white people, I mean Western people doing it for Indian things.
No,
It
no, no, yeah,
happens
yeah.
also.
So many Indian people I know, like, if you are in
Yeah.
Tamil Nadu, right? There's never a
Mhm.
point of time where you have to wear like the traditional dress, like where you are
Mhm.
always in a shorts and a shirt, or going out in a pant and a shirt, or trousers and a shirt, or so on. So there's never a point of time where you have to wear traditional dresses, but they wear traditional dresses and show, oh, I'm so Indian. So
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's
So
that's
like
less
Indian
that's less
weddings, for
bad.
example.
What?
Indian weddings, for example, like
Oh
you will
yeah.
wear jeans your whole life, and then like for Indian weddings, you're suddenly an Indian. And
Mm.
the same goes for us appropriating the West culture. I mean, we've been doing that for ages. Like when I say jeans, that itself is appropriated over decades, right?
But I
Uh,
think genes are less harmful if you take artworks. Like there's a lot of Indian people who do hip hop. Like why hip hop came out of a certain kind of pain and place of the African American
exactly,
culture.
yeah. I don't
Why
think
are
they
doing this?
really went into it with that understanding.
Yeah, but what this does contribute to is that, that a lot of people travel to the east for the sake of an experience and a culture for no reason whatsoever. They could have stayed at home and they could have experienced the richness of their human life there. But now you're marketed that, oh, how you haven't visited Bali yet? How could you not? You're torturing yourself, and you have to visit Bali now. So you haven't tried, let's say, Indian cuisine in Punjab. You have to try Indian cuisine in Punjab. You missed out. Next time you should go there. So now that's an extra flight, extra train, extra car, whatever you're booking. There is this extraordinary culture of consumerism. But I think you're one of the sharpest critiques of this out there. So what Anjana does is she takes, this is her own parody of Vogue, and she calls it Vogue, and she designs a cover for it, and I believe it's extraordinary because there's a really biting, sarcastic wit to this, and where in a few sentences you're able to invoke things that might take a whole essay for me. For example, here, electrifying personalities, how to shock the planet with your new electric car. Could you explain this as well? Because electric cars are told to be really things that save the planet, but not, they're not as straightforward as that line suggests, isn't it?
Yeah, no. So this post was okay. So as my colleagues and some of my friends too, who are Elon Musk fans, I kind of did this for them because because the debates always end with I mean, they always become heated about the fact that, oh, okay, like But electric cars are so much better. They'll throw the statistics and they'll be like, yeah, this is the future. Elon Musk is the future. Like his technology is innovation. The technology being the ultimate solution to climate change. That is
Hmm.
that's something that I don't agree with. And
Hmm.
so what I was trying to show in this post is that yes, electric cars are actually much better for the planet than conventional cars. They are way better in terms of life cycle emissions, tailpipe emissions, all of that. They're much better. If you want to buy a car, you should buy an electric car. If you're choosing between an electric car and a conventional car, but my question was, why do we even need to buy cars? Why is the solution that everyone?
Hmm.
Why is it that we assume that we should solve climate change by having everyone own an electric car? Why not just not own a car at all? And whoever is able to, I mean, like, of course, there are people with physical disabilities, mental disabilities who need to travel by private vehicle. So for them, yes, it makes sense. But the vast majority of us, do we really need to be aiming to own an electric car, all of us? Because that will increase emission, the production of those vehicles, because it doesn't come out of thin air. All of this
Yeah.
takes very
Hmm.
rare metals. All of this takes manufacturing in one country, shipping, assembling in another country, marketing, and then selling and warehousing. All of that takes place all over the world. It's going to travel thousands of kilometers before it reaches you. All of that takes emissions, and manufacturing an electric car is more carbon intensive than manufacturing a conventional car.
Hmm.
So when you take that into account, if you were to start replacing all the cars in the world with electric cars right now, then you would be, doubling, tripling the emissions that we have right now from conventional car manufacture.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
while you say that that's a blip, that's a small, price to pay, it's not actually, because we've passed that point of, like,
Hmm.
tipping
Now we can
elements.
account for a bit of difference to do because
Exactly.
this will definitely cause a lot of problem.
Exactly. And so
But from your statistics, if I remember correctly, you that only if you buy an electric car and own it for 6 years can you offset the overall load. Is it, some cars take 6 years to offset the load. So that means if you're buying a fossil fuel car like a normal car and you're driving it for 4 years and then you have an electric car, and you run it for 4 years. Only after 4 years does the electric car's overall emissions come lower than, let's say, the normal car. But if you are in this consumerist culture where you're changing cars every 2 or 3 years, it
exactly.
it might not even make a dent or
Yeah,
might even be worse. Yeah. Okay.
that's a point that I didn't mention there. I thought of, but then I googled the average, how long people keep their cars for, and it was around 10 years. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna put that point there.
Oh, is it okay? That's
Yeah,
I
that's kind of
I
nice
but
actually.
I but that's really
I mean,
heartening
that
to
was for
see.
the United States, so I don't know.
No, but at the same time, I think people who are going to buy Teslas, they change cars lot more
Yeah, and if
faster.
you have the
Don't
money, exactly.
Yeah,
If you have the money to buy a Tesla, you're definitely owning more than a Tesla. You know.
yeah, yeah. Of course. Yeah, yeah, you're
So
right.
my
Yeah.
question was, why don't we just improve public transport? Like, that is the cheapest for a taxpayer. For someone who is, for the vast majority of people, it's much cheaper to travel by well designed public transport
Hmm.
than it is to buy your own electric car.
Thank you for saying well-designed public transport. Yeah, that's yeah. It's because if you see Switzerland, right? Well, like,
Yeah.
I remember going there, and of course I polluted the atmosphere while going there. But I did go there, and the process was that every tram line was electric. Like
Mhm.
every
Yeah.
bus was electric. Bus was electric. There you had that. So, but you were very halving your emissions very easily every day by just taking the bus there. And it's but you take countries like the US, which on purpose does not implement public transport. They willfully, like, the trains are horrible, the buses are even worse. It's always the flights to travel from one state to the other. Even a neighboring state, you have to take a flight, and that is going to be quite problematic for the whole for the environment. But yet they don't do it. So people in Extinction Rebellion, if they campaign for public transport, let's say, that would be a very, very good
Yes.
use of their resources, rather than saying, they do have it right that 10 companies pollute more than
Yeah.
that's true. But at the same time, this is also contributing a lot. If they did watch for these things, that this would mean more meaningful change, really. But yeah, so how
Exactly.
does
And as I related this point you said about the United States, I talked about in that the suburban planning post, where it's
hmm.
like America has like, knowingly designed
Ah,
suburbia to
yeah.
be so annoying to, like, there is no public transport over there, and
Yeah, I allowed that as well. I need to show that as well. So
yeah, you're not
yeah.
allowed to set up shops, small shops, within a
Yeah.
suburb or a zone that's designated as residential. And that
Okay.
that blows my mind, because that's forcing people to take their car and go to drive 2-3 kilometers to the nearest store. And who wants to walk that? Like, if it's, if you
Yeah.
just
If you're
need like
carrying
a,
groceries as well, yeah, you can't
exactly.
walk there at all. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if they did a mass upheaval of the public transport network, and they decided to give everyone good public transport network, do you think the car lobbying groups would take that sitting? No, they wouldn't. They would put up a fight, because they know
Uh,
that this will make a huge dent in their sales.
Yeah, so by taking shops away from suburban residents and keeping them 3 kilometers apart, that's the way you can get on. That's the only way supermarkets can flourish, because that's the way they can eradicate competition. So for
Exactly.
supermarkets like Tesco and Walmart to flourish, these are the laws that help them. By
Yeah.
making these laws, you're making it compulsory for people to burn so much fossil fuel to get every week to get groceries, and you're
Yes.
just and small businesses cannot compete with that because they can't establish businesses in small houses. So this is quite a change. But what this does tell me, and I'll stop screen sharing now. What this does tell me is that these are the kinds of sober, meaningful conversations that need to be around this topic of consumerism and climate change, really. But instead, you get hair-raising activism, as I pointed out in my earlier in my introduction towards you. And I think that's definitely the kinds of dialogue we need to have. I think this has implications far beyond just climate change. It has implications for how do you live a satisfied life where you're not always surrounded by wants and needs, and rather you learn to be content. We have a cultural problem, and this cultural problem is we are externalizing the problem to the whole world, and I think
Yes.
this is the way of this. The humans are trying to solve it. If we don't have a world, we wouldn't have a cultural problem. Let's try and do that. Isn't it? So
I've
we
been
are.
thinking it like that too. I'm like, oh, that if everything goes to apocalypse, then we don't need to worry about this.
But unfortunately, you are ruling out apocalypse. So what we have talked is that apocalypse would actually be the happier solution here, because what instead will happen is just prolonged misery and suffering with no end in sight. That seems more
Yeah.
horrible to contemplate than apocalypse is just one wave. It's like swoosh. It's a
Mm.
clean one. Yeah. So this is quite intriguing. Yeah, to think about. Yeah, but it's a quite exercise to think about as well. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we are sort of creeping on to more than an hour actually in this, and
Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think we've kind of covered a lot of things that we said that we decided to cover. But we'll just add a few things. Do you have any suggested resources for people? Okay, other than okay, before we go into Anjana's suggested resources, let me suggest her social media profile, Green a Picture, and in that you'll find links to Law and Order magazine and her articles on there as well. So these are excellent resources. Not only are you very well going to be informed on them, you're also going to be going to read cultural commentary that is quite well informed as well, so and quite wise, I must say. Much like I would never have thought of these things in the terms that she states. No matter how many years I would have been contemplating them. So I recommend her page to everyone. When the podcast goes on YouTube, I'll link them there. I'll link the
Yeah.
articles and your Instagram page underneath the YouTube description, so people get to watch it. But do you have any more suggested resources for this?
I mean, I would say it's I think climate economics. And so first of all, I would like everyone who hasn't read it to read Chomsky, all of Chomsky. Um, Noam
Okay.
Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, and then I think that
I
sets the
think,
premise
yeah,
to read
yeah.
Naomi
Who
Klein.
Runs the World also, I think. Who Runs the World is also one of his another
Yes.
books by Chomsky. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, and then Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. And
Hmm.
then for those who haven't heard, John Pilger, he was an Australian he is an Australian documentary filmmaker who I think now lives in England. But he kind of does a kind of filmmaking that's very so basically all his documentaries are about exposing using publicly available documents and using
Hmm.
publicly available footage and everything, so you can actually fact check all of it. But he basically shows how America America's war machine functions, how the media played a role in wars. And then the more you go into this, I would say, a spiral of politics and economics, the
Yeah.
more you will understand about climate. I am not going to recommend climate resources for people because I don't think anyone wants to sit and study about atmospheric circulation and oceanic circulation and the interactions. I mean, unless you do, then I would suggest oceanography books and Alan Walker and all of that stuff. But I would say that go into the study the systems. And I think Tom Nicholas is a great YouTube personality who explains systems so well. So his YouTube channel is something I would recommend, that I've learned a lot from. So all of these things combined will kind of allow people to see the systems for what they are, how countries play the game, because it is all a game at the end of the day. How countries play it, who are the powerhouses, who's doing what exactly. And then I think when you fitting the puzzle together has to be something that the individual does themselves. When that happens, then I think they will understand how all of this is basically leading to the consequences that we see.
All
With
right.
respect.
How about we end on I end on something like, do you think there's a case for optimism for the Earth? Do you think there's a case made for? I mean, I can make a case for tragic optimism. I don't know if people have heard of the word tragic optimism before, but where you just work, you just don't worry if it's going as though things are going to get better, while they won't really. But that's a better way to live your life. So I am a tragic optimist. That's how I'd like to think about. But what's your case for the environment? Is there a case for optimism? Is there a case for moderation, or is there a case for abject pessimism?
I wouldn't say absolute of any end, like not
Okay.
absolute pessimism or optimism. I'm
Hmm.
not an optimist, unfortunately, but I am a rationalist, and I think I wouldn't say that everything's gonna get better soon, because I don't see, even though Biden came into power, I don't see like his policies have not really changed
Hmm. Hmm.
drastically. Nothing has fundamentally changed about the systems, and until that happens, nothing is going to change. And if that state continues, if no one really fights against that, then pessimism might be the only choice. But if systemic changes begin to happen, or at least wherever our viewers are living, if something happens locally or in their country, then that's a chance for optimism. Latch onto that and work towards improving on that, like building on that. Don't let it go to waste.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's all I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, I feel it's a good place to end.
Perfect.
And you can find, do follow IFPWD on social media profiles. We'll link it all in the YouTube. And you can also follow Anjana's extraordinary profile called Greener Picture on Instagram as well. And yeah, so stay tuned. We have more episodes coming up in the meantime. And yeah, just keep yourself informed on these topics, because you should, because if you don't know what's going on on the outside, your destiny will not be controlled by yourself. So just keep yourself informed. All right, thank you everyone, and it's goodbye from me. Goodbye, Anjana.
Anyway, bye.